My name is Charlotte, and I'm 20 years old, and my life has been anything but easy. After my dad passed away 3 years ago, everything changed. My mom, Eleanor, and my younger sister, Linda, are my only family, but it feels like the weight of our world has fallen entirely on me. I work full-time at a local accounting firm, juggling my job with night classes to finish my business degree. Every paycheck I bring home goes toward rent, bills, groceries, everything we need to keep this house running. My mom doesn't work, and Linda is still in high school. She's 18 but hasn't shown much interest in stepping up to help. Instead, she spends her time hanging out with friends, shopping, or planning her next outing. I always told myself it's my responsibility to provide. Someone has to hold things together, right? But it's exhausting. Most days, I barely get 5 hours of sleep, and the rare free time I have is spent trying to save whatever I can from my paycheck. My dream has always been to save enough for my engagement party, something simple but meaningful to celebrate a future I've been working so hard to build. Mom and Linda, though, have a bond I've never really been a part of. They're close in a way that makes me feel like an outsider. Maybe it's because I'm never home, too busy working, studying, and managing the house. Sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own family, like my only value to them is what I can provide. But I've learned to bury those feelings and keep going. After all, we're family and family sticks together. At least that's what I used to believe. One day, after a long shift at work, I came home feeling drained, like always. I walked into the living room and noticed my sister Linda parading around in a designer dress, twirling as if she were on a runway. It wasn't just any dress. It was a brand I knew cost more than I ever spent on myself. She looked ecstatic, giggling as she showed off the intricate details to my mom. I stood there for a moment, confused. "Where did you get that dress?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Linda barely glanced at me. "Mom got it for me. Isn't it gorgeous?" she said, her voice dripping with excitement. I turned to Mom. "You bought that?" I asked. "How? With what money?" Mom looked up from the magazine she was reading and said nonchalantly, "From your savings. You've been working so hard, and Linda needed something nice for the school event. It's not a big deal." Her words hit me like a slap. "What do you mean, my savings?" My voice cracked. "I've been putting away every extra dollar for over a year, stashing it in a joint account we all had access to but that I thought was safe. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. $5,000 I'd saved to put toward my engagement party someday, my future." Mom sighed, brushing me off like I was overreacting. "Charlotte, she's your sister. She needed it, and we're family. Family helps each other out. Don't be so dramatic." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. That money wasn't for her. I yelled, unable to hold back the frustration and betrayal I felt. I've been working myself to the bone to save it for something important to me, something I've dreamed about. Mom rolled her eyes, her tone growing sharper. "Oh, stop acting like it's the end of the world. It's just money. You can always work more and save it again. Linda deserves to enjoy her life too. Don't be jealous." Jealous? Was she serious? My entire life since Dad died had been about sacrificing for this family, making sure the bills were paid, food was on the table, and everyone had what they needed. I barely spent anything on myself. And now my own mother was telling me I was jealous because she had stolen my hard-earned money and handed it to Linda for a dress. And cash for outings. Outings, of all things. "I'm not jealous," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm tired. I'm tired of being treated like an ATM. That money was mine, and you had no right to touch it." Mom stood up then, her voice rising. "How dare you talk to me like that? After everything I've done for you? We're family, Charlotte. Linda needed it, and I made a decision. You need to stop being so selfish." Selfish. That word cut deeper than I thought it could. All these years, I put their needs above my own, sacrificing my time, energy, and dreams for this family. And now, for the first time, I realized it didn't matter. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I didn't say anything else. My head was spinning, my chest tight with anger and hurt. I turned and walked to my room, shutting the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. The way Mom dismissed my sacrifices, the way Linda didn't even seem to care. I felt betrayed, invisible, like I didn't matter at all except for what I could provide. By morning, I had made my decision. I packed a bag with a few clothes and essentials, took what little cash I had left, and walked out the door. I didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. I just left. For the first time in years, I put myself first. It was terrifying, but in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved more than being taken for granted. The first month after I left was both liberating and terrifying. I had no real plan, just a suitcase, a small studio apartment I found on short notice, and enough money to get by for a little while. For the first time, I didn't have to hear my name being called every 5 minutes or feel like the weight of an entire household rested on my shoulders. The silence was strange but also peaceful. I started to breathe again, really breathe, for the first time in years. But it wasn't long before the call started. At first, it was once or twice a day. Then it was 5, 10, sometimes more. Every missed call from Mom made my stomach twist. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I already knew what she wanted: money. She wasn't calling to apologize or ask how I was doing. She was calling because the bills were piling up, and now that I wasn't there, no one else was stepping up to take care of things. I blocked her number eventually, but then the emails started. Long messages about how I was tearing the family apart, how Linda was suffering because of me, how I was selfish for abandoning them. I didn't respond to a single one, but they still got to me. I cried some nights, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered the exhaustion, the betrayal, and the way my mom had told me to work harder, like my efforts were nothing. 3 months passed before I saw her again. It was a Monday evening, and I had just finished my shift at work. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, I saw her standing there, leaning against the hood. My heart sank. She looked tired, her hair unkempt, her clothes a little more worn than I remembered. But I didn't feel sympathy. I felt dread. "Charlotte," she said as I approached, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." I kept my distance. "What do you want, Mom?" She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Please, we need your help. We've lost everything since you left. The bills are overdue. The landlord is threatening eviction, and Linda had to quit school. She's working at a coffee shop now just to help us get by. She's struggling, Charlotte. Please come back. We need you." Hearing those words, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and even a flicker of satisfaction. Linda, the sister who never lifted a finger, was finally learning what it meant to work hard. For a moment, I wanted to say something cruel, something like "good. Now she knows what it's like to live in the real world." But I bit my tongue. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry you're struggling, but I can't help you. I won't." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Charlotte. We're family. You can't just turn your back on us." I crossed my arms, my voice firm. "Family? Is that what you call it? Because to me, it felt like I was just a wallet to you. I worked myself to exhaustion for years, and the one time I wanted to save for something important, you stole it from me. You didn't care about my dreams or my sacrifices. You only cared about what I could give you." She started crying then, real sobs that made her shoulders shake. For a split second, I felt a pang of guilt, but I reminded myself of all the nights I had cried, feeling used and invisible, and how she had never cared. "Linda is learning the value of hard work now," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And so are you. I'm not coming back, Mom. I deserve better than to be taken advantage of." Her sobs turned into pleas, but I didn't listen. I got in my car and drove away, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. It hurt to see her like that, but I knew in my heart that going back would mean losing myself again. And I had worked too hard to find my freedom to give it up now. In the weeks after that confrontation with my mom, I finally began to feel free. It wasn't easy, of course. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had done the right thing. Guilt is a heavy burden, especially when it comes to family. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of what I had endured: years of sacrifice, of being taken for granted, of having my dreams dismissed as unimportant. I had spent too much of my life putting everyone else first. It was time to choose me. With my newfound independence, I threw myself into building a life I could be proud of. I worked hard at my job. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was saving for myself. I took up hobbies I'd always wanted to try, but never had the time or energy for. I started painting, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. It wasn't much at first, just strokes of color on a blank canvas, but it felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost. I also made friends, real friends who cared about me, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. They became my family in a way my own never had. They cheered for my successes, comforted me on tough days, and reminded me of my worth. Slowly, the hole in my heart left by my family's betrayal began to heal. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my little apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized something. I was happy. Truly, deeply happy. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by resentment or exhaustion. I was free to dream, to grow, to be myself. I thought about my mom and Linda sometimes. I wondered if they were okay, if they had learned anything from the struggles they faced after I left. Part of me hoped they had, that they were finally learning to stand on their own. But I knew it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had given them enough of myself. Now it was their turn to figure things out. Looking back, I don't regret leaving. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was also the best. I finally stood up for myself, and in doing so, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I found a life that belonged to me, not one dictated by someone else's needs or expectations. And that, I realized, was worth everything. As I sat there, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin, I smiled. I didn't know exactly what the future held. But for the first time, I was excited to find out. This was my life, and I was finally living it on my own terms. And that was the most empowering thing of all.